Brandon Lawson, a 26-year-old oil field worker from San Angelo, Texas, shared a home with his longtime girlfriend, Lawson, and their 4 children. Known for being a devoted father and loving partner, Brandon deeply cherished his family. While his parents lived over 200 miles away in Crowley, Texas, his brother Kyle lived nearby in San Angelo. But on the night of August 9, 2013, something went terribly wrong. After pulling over on Highway 277, Brandon made several alarming phone calls before disappearing without a trace. What happened that night has remained a baffling mystery, puzzling both investigators and internet sleuths for years. Welcome to Bad Things. Let's unveil the case of Brandon Lawson and analyze what most likely happened. The story starts on August 9, 2013, another hot summer night in San Angelo, Texas. At just 26 years old, Brandon was already a father of 4 children and worked in the oil industry. He often put in over 90 hours a week, facing long hours and heavy stress. He was known to be a family-oriented and responsible young man, but he had also occasionally struggled with drug use. Brandon Lawson and his longtime girlfriend, Lawson, had gotten into an argument, mainly because he hadn't come home the night before. Also suspected that he had been taking drugs, which only made the situation more tense. The argument escalated enough for Brandon to storm out of the house, frustrated and needing to cool off. To get his mind straight and talk it out with someone, he told he was going to his father's house in Crowley, Texas. It was a 2-hour drive. He called his father to let him know he was coming. His father tried to dissuade him, but Brandon got into his Ford F-150 and drove off anyway. After some time, Brandon called his brother Kyle around 12:30 a.m. to let him know he had run out of gas on Highway 277 near Bronte, Texas. He also mentioned that he had been chased out of town by Mexicans. Kyle asked Brandon if he was high, but Brandon denied it. Kyle, along with his girlfriend and their 4-year-old son, drove out to help Brandon, even though it was the middle of the night. Kyle found the situation more odd than frightening and didn't believe Brandon was in any real danger, despite what he had said about the Mexicans. While Kyle was now on his way, around 12:50 a.m., 20 minutes after first calling his brother, Brandon made a call to 911.
Yes, I'm in the middle of the field. It's like we're just pushed some guys over. Right here going towards Javelin on both sides. My truck ran out of gas. There's one car here. You got to take the pictures to the woods. Please learn.
Let's pause for a moment and focus on this recording. This call is one of the most chilling and mysterious aspects of the case because Brandon's frantic voice makes it almost impossible to understand. What he actually says is highly debated, and we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. If you want to dive deep into this recording, we recommend the True Crime Garage podcast, which has 2 full episodes dedicated solely to the phone correspondence between Brandon and the dispatcher. Back to the story. As we hear in the phone call, the dispatcher, who was actually answering from a nursing home and may have lacked the necessary training, fails to gather the critical information needed to send someone to look for Brandon. To her credit, she tries to call him back, but only reaches voicemail. But without the info on his whereabouts, she can't send any help. Meanwhile, Kyle and Brandon call each other many times over the next 40 minutes, but each conversation ends after only a few phrases. In 2 separate calls, Brandon manages to communicate that he is bleeding and that he can see Kyle as they approach the spot where he had parked the car. Kyle, however, can neither see nor hear his brother, except through the brief phone calls. He doesn't put much thought into the fact that Brandon says he's bleeding, assuming he may have just fallen and gotten a scrape or something similar. Naturally, Kyle asks Brandon about his location, but just as he finishes his sentence, the call cuts off. Once again, at this point, Kyle doesn't appear to realize that Brandon is in any real danger. He seems more confused by the situation than alarmed. Just after 1 a.m., as Kyle, his girlfriend, and their son arrived, Deputy Neil from the sheriff's office pulled up almost at the same time. The deputy was responding to a trucker's report about Brandon's truck being parked hazardously close to the highway. Both Kyle and Deputy Neil were unaware of the earlier 911 call. As they checked on Brandon's F-150, they discovered that the doors were unlocked, the keys and cell phone were missing, and there was no sign of any violence or struggle around them. Because of the sheriff's deputy, Kyle thought Brandon might be hiding, as he had an old arrest warrant for some drugs-related charge. Both Kyle and the sheriff drove up and down the road looking for Brandon, before Kyle placed the empty gas can he had brought from home in the bed of the pickup and drove home with his son and girlfriend. Kyle returned at 5 a.m., calling out for his brother. To his surprise, he saw that the gas can remained untouched where he had left it. It was then that it really began to sink in that something bad might have happened. Since the truck was parked over the white line on the highway, it was towed around 8 a.m. Family and volunteers started searching later that same day, and Ledessa officially reports Brandon missing August the 13th. Brandon was never heard from again, despite extensive efforts from his family. It took a long time to get the sheriff on board with the search. Initially, they suggested Brandon had run off with a lover, even though there was no evidence to support this. And then they started coming up with other far-fetched theories. It took quite some time before they treated it as a real missing person case. It was Ledessa who first discovered that Brandon had called 911 by checking the details from the phone provider. It would take a long time for the family to get a hold of the now infamous recording. With no new evidence, the search gradually lost momentum after a few months. While the police and most others gave up, the Lawsons remained unwavering in their determination. A few private investigators and volunteers continued searching for Brandon, but despite their efforts, nothing surfaced. Until February 2022, when everything changed. In a place long thought to have been thoroughly searched, a volunteer made an unexpected discovery. The volunteer and the rest of the search team uncovered human remains. Based on the clothing found with the remains, they believed it was their missing family member, Brandon. The Lawsons turned the evidence over to the police and it was sent for forensic examination. Although the results are still pending due to the small sample size and the remains exposure, the family is convinced they have finally found Brandon. Police cover-up. One of the most common conspiracy theories surrounding this case is that the police were involved. Their handling of the investigation in its early stages was widely criticized, and for a long time, they appeared uninterested in solving the case. The core of this theory, however, revolves around the delay in releasing the 911 recording. Some have speculated that this delay suggests the recording may have been tampered with. Specifically, the word that sounds like has led some to theorize that it originally said state trooper. The exact details of what might have happened vary depending on who you ask, but the general theory suggests that Brandon was stopped by a state trooper and that the situation escalated from there in some way. Drug psychosis. Brandon's frantic 911 call about being chased and injured may have been influenced by his drug use. It was no secret that he had been using methamphetamine. Although he had sought treatment to improve his condition, he had relapsed multiple times. Some believe that drug-induced paranoia drove him to become disoriented in the wilderness. They argue that the erratic nature of his phone calls and his alarming claims were likely the result of his impaired mental state at the time. Starting a new life. Many, including Deputy Neil, hinted at the possibility that Brandon had staged his own disappearance to start a new life. Now that he has most likely been found, this theory can easily be dismissed. However, even before this discovery, there were no concrete signs that he had been planning such a thing. Foul play. One theory surrounding Brandon's disappearance is that his involvement with drugs may have led to foul play by dangerous individuals connected to that world. His father and brother were aware of his drug use and had warned him about the risks of associating with such people. Brandon's 911 call, where he mentioned being chased, suggests he might have been fleeing from individuals tied to his drug connections. It has also been speculated that his truck was tampered with, causing it to run out of gas in a remote area. These individuals may have followed him, confronted him, and Brandon, in a state of panic, fled into the wilderness. Despite calling for help, they could have caught up with him, leading to his death. His remains, later scattered by wildlife, left little evidence, making his disappearance seem like a mystery rather than a targeted crime. Brandon Lawson was a man whose life was tragically cut short far too soon. Supporting 4 children at the age of 26 is no small task, and working over 90 hours a week is nothing less than extreme. For those pushing themselves at such a relentless pace, some turn to meth to keep going, and we know Brandon had done this in the past. The argument he had with LaDessa reportedly centered on the fact that he hadn't come home the night before, though he denied using any drugs. However, no matter how heated the argument was, it seems unusual that he would drive almost 3 hours to his father's house in the middle of the night, especially when his father tried to talk him out of it. A short drive around the block or staying in another room for the night would have been more understandable if he didn't want to face LaDessa. To us, this situation seems like the perfect opportunity for him to relapse. Since he hadn't come home the previous night, it's reasonable to assume he had slept very little, and with the grueling work hours he was putting in, his body was likely running on fumes. Adding a drug like meth on top of that could easily blur the line between fantasy and reality, with paranoia and psychotic symptoms taking hold. We believe this is what happened. That Brandon panicked, ran off, injured himself, and ultimately succumbed to the elements. The remains that were found are not far from where his truck had stopped, and it's entirely plausible that he made it there on foot. It's harder to imagine that he was shot and carried there, as he was quite heavy, and there were no other signs of people around when Kyle and the deputy arrived. Of course, it's possible he was followed and killed where his remains were found, but even then, it's strange that no evidence was left near his truck. Unfortunately, we believe this was a tragic chain of events. Bad decisions combined with sheer bad luck, leading to the most devastating outcome. Do you agree with our view, or do you think there was another angle to this mystery? We'd love to hear your opinion and theories in the comments.